One down, base is empty. Oh, that ball drilled back up the box and nailed the pitcher. Safe at first, and now after the play, we'll check on the right-hander status.
Wasn't really my intention to do. This isn't really a video about
the left fielder. Oh boy!
Actually,
yeah. Yes, he did.
There we go.
Turn. So, I just want to talk about the deadline, specifically around the Mets. I got the Mets and the Brewers here playing in a minor league stadium from the show. Called up a lot of the Mets' top prospects just to kind of have fun with the roster. You know, for me, it's pretty obvious that the Mets are looked at this year and looked at this trade deadline. Not saying that they didn't try their best, but they definitely looked at this as it's important, but it's not all about winning the World Series this year. It's pretty obvious that they wanted to protect their top prospects, protect the guys who they see as more than just top prospects. Traditionally, if you have one or two guys from your farm system that produce at an upper tier level, you're successful as a farm system. Let's just be honest. Baseball is not football, right? In football, you draft players, and basically if you don't draft well, you cannot fill up a roster with free agents and through trades. The NFL is just all about the ability to draft and then supplement the draft through trade and agency. But the reality is you mainly have to be able to pick your players and go from there because you have a salary cap restraint. The NBA is about star power. It's not about building a team. It's about, do you have the elite players? If you have them, you're a championship contender. If you don't, you're not. Well, baseball is different from those two. In baseball, you have a big farm system, but the reality is the farm system, if you're the New York Mets, the Yankees, I'll throw the Cardinals in, but mainly the Dodgers, the Padres nowadays, the Giants, the Red Sox. If you're one of those teams, the farm system has a lot of players, but you basically want to produce 1, 2, 3 upper tier players from the farm system. The rest of your roster that you're going to go into battle with to try to win a World Series can come from free agency, can come from trading with teams that don't want to spend a lot of money. There's only about 10 teams in the upper crust of Major League Baseball that can realistically win a World Series based on what they're willing to spend, because it takes money to keep your top players. It takes money to make trades with people that have good players on big contracts or who are about to be on big contracts. So the Mets are one of those teams. Now the Mets basically said, Francisco Alvarez, we're not moving him. Brett Baty, we're not moving him. Macario, we're not moving him. Vientos, we're not moving him. Even Ramirez and Single A, we're not moving him. Okay, now if that's the case, they have just make sure they're upfront with the fans, because you can't tell me you went all in to win a World Series this year if you're not willing to move those guys. Because at the end of the day, and this is the scary part about prospects, right? They're just prospects. They've done nothing. They might all bomb. For the Mets' sake, they need to hope, pray, and plead that these players all hit. The Mets have a lot of ways that they could infuriate their fans in the coming year. One, you don't win the World Series this year, you don't even make it to the World Series, right? If that's the case, fans will rip them for not going all in to get Soto, not going all in to get Otani, not going all in to get the best relief pitchers in the market. They'll find a way. They'll blame it on this trade deadline, right? The second thing is, if the Mets don't get to a World Series, and then let's say next year they decide that they are going to sign Nimmo, that they're going to keep James McCann through his contract, that they're going to not open up space. Obviously, Francisco Lindor can't be moved with his contract, so they're stuck with him. That's a whole other story. But basically not make room at the major league level for the guys that they have in the minor leagues who they believe are stud impact player prospects. if they don't make room for those guys, the fans will turn around and say, wait a second, you didn't want to trade these guys, but you're not playing them. What's the problem? So the only way that the Mets can win here is, number one, you win a World Series. Number two is you at least get to a World Series. If you lose, then you decide, okay, it's time to have these young stud prospects become impact players immediately, not from now, and they all come up and you make room for them. You got to let Nimmo go. You don't overpay Diaz. You might say you got the best of Diaz, so you don't overpay him. If someone else wants to give him ridiculous money, you have to live with that. I would hate to see it, but you don't overpay Alonso either. Alonso is having a great year. By all standards, his best. He's going to hit for a good average this year, and he's still going to give you the power. So Alonso, you probably want to keep. You got Escobar. He's been a failure. Canna's not an impact player. He's a nice player. He's not an impact player. So you got guys that you could move on from or just basically get out of the way for the top guys like this guy at the plate right here, Mark Vientos. Obviously, their catcher, Alvarez, is going to be in the majors next year. He should be. Arguably, he should be there this year because they put so much effort into trying to get another catcher, which didn't make any sense to me at all. You're paying McCann. You got Nito. You got a draft. They drafted a catcher, and you got Alvarez at AAA now. And they wanted to waste resources on getting another catcher. That was crazy to me. They didn't get Christian Velasquez. They didn't get the guy from the Cubs, Contreras, who they were acting like he was Babe Ruth or something. So, I mean, it's obvious that's what this trade deadline was about. It was just about trying to get pieces, but not moving any of their big monster prospects that they have ultimate confidence in and they believe are going to carry them into the future. And if that's the case, hopefully it works out for them. But it's a huge risk because you can't say for sure that they're going to be in this position next year. And you got to be about something here. And this is not something that the fans are going to want to admit. It's not something that management's going to want to admit. You paid Max Scherzer for 1 year. You have no guarantees that he'll be any good at age 38. You don't know about DeGrom. He's had a couple of years now where he can't stay on the field. So realistically, their best assets are DeGrom and Scherzer as a 1-2 punch. And the odds are very low that you're going to have that 1-2 punch for another 2 seasons. This is probably your shot with that 1-2 tandem. So do you go all in while you got your best assets, or do you hedge that you're going to keep your top position player prospects, but you may not have the starting pitching in 2 years that you had now? David Peterson doesn't look like he's going to be an ace. They didn't really have anybody else before who looked like they were going to be an ace. So the one thing that's looming here is the Mets might be in a rebuild mode in their rotation. Carrasco's not a young buck. Bassett's not a young guy. And certainly neither, DeGrom and Scherzer aren't. Now, DeGrom's a free agent. They might have to overpay him because he's a stud. But let's be real. This guy may not be anything in 2 years if he's still playing. And Scherzer at 38, 39, are you expecting to get the same production? So this really might be the moment for the Mets. The window might be this year and done. Maybe next year. Maybe. So, yeah, they're taking a big risk. Now, I personally would have hated to see a Brett Baty or Alvarez go, but I wouldn't mind if they were getting a guy like a Soto. Now, even if you make the moves that are saying all in, there's no guarantee to win a World Series. The Mets could still lose the division to the Braves. The Mets could still lose 2 out of 3 in a wild card series. It's not like you make it to the playoffs and you're guaranteed to do anything. So I get it. There's no guarantees. But if you're Epler today, you have got to make it clear to the fan base that you were trying to protect your most coveted assets and that you just, did everything you could, but there was no deal to be had. Because the fans right now are sitting there scratching their heads saying, this is our best shot to make it to a World Series in many moons. Okay? Because 2015 was really out of nowhere. And if you look at the team, The Mets struggled to get back to the playoffs, lost in the wild card round in 2016 in that one game. And then 2017, nothing, 2018, nothing, 2019, nothing, 2020, nothing, 2021. So if you look at it, the Mets, that team in 2015 was an anomaly. It really wasn't a quality roster that was going to sustain success because they had injuries in the rotation. You know, Wheeler and Syndergaard didn't pan out for them. And then, of course, we know what happened with Cespedes. So the reality is these things are not guaranteed, as the Mets themselves should know. So what are you going to do when that window starts to close next year on your rotation, even though you have these prospects? You have to, if you're Billy Epler, you have to be thinking about the rotation next year. You got to be thinking about who are you going to cash in on. I don't think you could afford to go out and overpay the guys you have. I mean, to me, Brandon Nimmo, he may be homegrown. He's got to go unless he's willing to work for nothing. Because if he wants to cash in, it can't be with the Mets. They have so much money they're going to have to commit to other guys. And again, he takes up a roster spot. Escobar's taking up a roster spot. You know, McCann is taking up a roster spot. Canna is taking up a roster spot. And Canna's been the best of those three. He's fine, but he's just okay. He's not an impact guy. He's not going to get you the power and hit for the extremely high average and steal a ton of bases. Or there's nothing dynamic about his skill set. And Lindor, let's be honest, he's not a $300 million player. I mean, let's all call a spade here. And this is something I'm getting really annoyed with when I watch Mets broadcasts as I hit a home run with the guy. Okay, Francisco Lindor is having a good season. Francisco Lindor was a great player with Cleveland. But Francisco Lindor is a 260 hitter who's probably going to hit 24 home runs, maybe 25 home runs. And if he drives in 100 runs and does that, you could say this guy has had a successful season. Is he a $300 million player? A $300 million player should be a guy who hits 35 homers, hits 300, and still plays good defense. Every single season, and he's clutch. Is Lindor that kind of player for the Mets? Not Cleveland for the Mets. No, he's not. And if you look at his numbers and you look at the numbers for Alonso, Alonso is a $300 million player because Alonso is going to probably hit 35, 40 homers this year at the pace he's on. He's going to probably hit at least maybe 270. So he's going to hit similar or higher average than Lindor. So is he worth $300 million? He's not the defensive player Lindor is, but he's not terrible at first base. So let's be real here. The Mets have been trying to market to the fans how they didn't totally screw the pooch by overpaying Lindor, but they did. And what's also strange, and it's got to be said, is the Mets have middle infield prospects, but there's no way that they're going to take shortstop. So the only room that the Mets have right now is at second base and third, which means that Jeff McNeil can't be a long-term second baseman, and that means that Escobar's got to go because the Mets have 2 or 3 guys who are third baseman / second baseman. Brett Batty's probably a third baseman. So Vientos and Macario could be a shortstop, but he's not going to play shortstop for the Mets because they have Lindor. So that means he's going to have to play second base, which means where does Vientos play? Is he going to play first base? Well, we have a first baseman. Is he going to play the outfield? Yeah, it looks like it. So it means Mark Canna's got to go. Starling Marte is probably a better option to keep than Nimmo. So that means Nimmo has to go. Those are the kinds of things that are going to have to happen for this team. And it's weird because they're a good team in a good position, but changes are going to have to be made. Otherwise, and this is what I was trying to say earlier, if you don't make those moves, let those guys go, guess what happens? You are going to be crucified because that means you kept on to players that you had no room for. Because if you can't play Macario, Vientos, Alvarez, and Batty in this lineup next year, then what the heck are you doing not trading all of them to get Juan Soto, who's a proven player on a track to a Hall of Fame career? These are the problems that you have if you're the Mets. And one thing that you got to be realistic about, if you're the New York Mets and their fans, and it's hard to admit, it is much harder being the New York Yankees than it is being traditionally the New York Mets. For many, many years, the Mets sat in the shadow of the Yankees, not only in their own city but across the board. And, rightfully so, the Yankees had the production. But the Mets, basically since the 80s, and at brief moments in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Mets really, have never been able to recapture the city and the region for that matter. But the Yankees, being the Yankees means you can't do anything wrong. You can't trade top prospects and not get amazing production from the guys you trade for. You can't not win the World Series. You can't have any kind of stutter step along the path. You're not even allowed to rebuild because they don't have to rebuild. They have to retool. If you're the Mets, you've been living in a world where you don't retool. You don't rebuild. Where you just kind of flutter in anonymity, and then at some points in time you pop out, like a gopher, and suddenly, you have a winning season, and fans are just happy to have the winning season. It's cute. It's happy to be there. And that was 2015. But if you look at the Mets now, with their new ownership and, with their new attitude, the feel around the Mets is the Mets have to be the Yankees, not the old Mets. The Mets have to be the Cardinals. The Mets have to be the Dodgers. The Mets have to be the Red Sox. The Mets can no longer be this cute little team. And that is such a huge difference from where the Mets have been in the last 25, 30 years. Basically since the 80s. The Mets are in a position now where they're not allowed to make a mistake with their prospects, not trading them to go all in, or them not hitting and then suddenly they're in a further rebuild. The Mets can't sign a guy like a Lindor and then have him struggle. The Mets basically have to be the Yankees now, and we're starting to experience what that's like. Billy Epler is experiencing what that's like. Steve Cohen is experiencing what that's like. I'm not saying it's a bad problem to have. If you're the Mets, it's got to be refreshing to be in a position where there's expectations of success, where there's expectations from your fans and from the marketplace, from the sports radio, from the bloggers and everything else, to be a winning team, to get positive attention, and to sell tickets, sell ratings, and all the other sell jerseys. That's got to be a good feeling. But the flip side of that is you no longer get the grace period. You no longer get the cushion. And your fans are no longer just happy to be there. Because just being there doesn't mean anything to them now. You're supposed to be there. You have to win. So the Mets, especially at this trade deadline, are finally experiencing something that I don't think they've experienced since the 80s and maybe ever. They have to be the New York Yankees. They can no longer be the New York Mets. And believe me, in 1969, I wasn't around for it. But 69, the Mets were supposed to be good, but they didn't know that they were going to be a World Series team. They were supposed to be good from the sense that they had two good starting pitchers. They didn't know they were going to be a World Series contender and win a World Series. And if you look at the Mets, traditionally after being a good team, they rarely follow that up with anything. They've only made the playoffs in back-to-back seasons 2 times in their franchise history. So they are not a team in a model franchise for consistency. They're not the St. Louis Cardinals, who are always in the hunt, regardless of who they have, regardless of the style of team, regardless of the circumstance. They're not the Yankees. The Yankees never fall out of it. Even when they fall out of it, they win 85 games. That's considered falling out for them. The Mets have only made the playoffs consecutive seasons 2 times in their franchise history. The Florida Marlins have won 2 World Series since 1993. The Mets haven't won a World Series since 1986. So just take a step back and realize that being a team that has expectations, being the New York Yankees, it's a totally different world. And are the Mets going to excel in this position, being the New York Yankees? Or are they going to fold like a cheap 10? I don't know. I think with their frontline pitching, they're in good shape, but that window is so narrow. The best argument you could make, and I'm not saying that this is correct, because I do like their prospects, but the best argument you could make for why their prospects don't mean anything to the Mets is that their best players are DeGrom and Scherzer, and they likely have a year tops of high-level production out of them left. When you live in that kind of world, reality must set in that, hey, this may not work. So that's basically what I wanted to stream this for. I thought about making a YouTube video. I'm like, I'm playing my game. Why don't I just talk Mets? That's a 3-run bomb. Time to try. You want to win your division because you don't want to have to play in that wild card round, get the bye, make the Braves play in the wild card, make them expend some energy beating the Phillies, or I don't know who they would play, maybe the Cardinals, Brewers, we don't know yet. Make them work to get into the divisional round and set yourself up for a home field. Can you imagine a Friday night home game, blackout jerseys in the playoffs? How excited that fan base would be, how much Citi Field will rock. Citi Field has rocked this year like it has never rocked in its history. It's never been Shea Stadium. You know, I mean, Shea Stadium when things were good, Shea Stadium would rock. It was a home field advantage there. Citi Field has always been kind of a nice stadium, nice ballpark, but never a place that felt like a true gritty New York baseball home. And now it's starting to get that feel because the team is better. So let's see how that would look if you get yourself a home playoff game Friday night, blackout Friday, Mets Braves, Mets Phillies, Mets Brewers, Mets Cardinals, Mets Dodgers, Mets Padres. Just imagine that stadium and what that Citi Field atmosphere would look like. I mean, that to me would be the ultimate for the Mets. And obviously winning would be the name of the game there. You don't want to get to that spot and blow it. But, you know, you'll feel good about your matchups, and that's the thing. You keep these guys healthy. You got Trevor May coming back. You got Diaz at the back end of your bullpen. You got Frontline starting. And then you got a lineup that's produced. What I'm curious to see this season, especially at catcher position, it's the ultimate tease. The Mets have, you know, the top offensive prospect for the Mets is Alvarez, one of the best prospects in the game, and he's a catcher. Now, he's caught Scherzer and he's caught DeGrom a couple times in minor leagues. It's got to be tempting. When you have McCann who's struggling, and you have Nito who you could platoon with, it's got to be tempting to call up Francisco Alvarez. It's got to be. Now, I know it's a big spot, it's the playoff run and all that, you want to stick with veterans, but you got to be at least thinking about it. If for no other reason the fact that McCann has been such a failure at the major league level with the Mets offensively, and Nito is a solid catcher. He doesn't give you the thump. And the guy who happens to have the most thump in your minor league system is a catcher. It's got to be tempting. I know you don't want to risk bringing a guy up early and ruining him, quote unquote. And catcher is not like calling up a left fielder because he has to be able to manage the staff. I get that. But you got to be tempted. You know, you have to be tempted when you got Escobar struggling, or, you know, if Mark Canha goes into a slump, you got to be tempted to look at Vientos. You got to be. It's not that it's the right thing, but the tease is there. The tease is there for the Mets. But I think with the moves that they made, getting Tyler Naquin and obviously adding a Vogelbach, you know, and a Darren Ruff, the odds are that the Mets probably aren't going to do anything, you know, dramatic, like calling up any of these top guys at this point. I think they did those moves because they're short term and they can, you know, let those guys go after the season, and then you got to start making room for the other guys. So probably nothing crazy happening, but, you know, we'll see. Anyway, that's pretty much it for me. That's all I wanted to talk about. Appreciate it again, and that's my opinion on the trade deadline.